to Narayana IAS Academy. This is Sureka Bhaskar presenting to you the daily news analysis. For today's discussion, we've picked up a number of articles from The Hindu and the Indian Express which are both important and relevant for the UPSC CSE examination. So now let us have a look at the articles one by one. The first article for the day has been picked up from page number 16 of The Hindu. NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, is actually looking forward to monitor 189 high-risk glacial lakes in order to prevent disasters. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the concept of the GLOFs, that is nothing but the glacial lake outburst floods, the causes as well as the vulnerabilities of GLOFs in India. And finally, we'll be discussing about what is the disaster resilient framework for glacial lakes. The second article for the day has been picked up from page number 12 of the Indian Express, For Dignity in the End. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the concept of euthanasia, the types of euthanasia, the arguments for it as well as against it, as well as we'll be discussing what are the legal and the ethical issues surrounding euthanasia, and finally we'll be looking into what has been the recent Supreme Court judgment with respect to that of euthanasia and the end of life care. Moving forward, the third article has been picked up from page number 10 of the Indian Express, Europe's push, India's agency. Why Modi's visit to Kyiv is significant. So in this particular article, as the title suggests, we'll be discussing about the significance of the recent visit of the Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine, signifying a shift in India's foreign policy, especially with respect to that of engagement of India with the East European countries. The fourth article has been picked up from page number 6 of The Hindu. IIA finds novel ways to explore the sun's secrets by studying the solar magnetic fields. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent methods that have been developed by the astronomers in order to predict the solar amplitude, which will help in better forecasting of the space weather. The last article for the day has been picked up from page number 12 of The Hindu, a look at the ongoing Indian space missions. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about the recent developments in India's space programs, especially with respect to the missions, the roadmaps, the Gaganyaan project, the NGLV, as well as the private sector involvement in space activities. And towards the end of the session, we'll be solving few prelims as well as the mains practice questions. And now let us get into the discussion. The first article that we've picked up for discussion today is NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, actually is set to monitor around 190 high-risk glacial lakes in order to prevent disasters. So the takeaway for us with respect to that of the examination is to understand the concept of GLOFs, that is the glacial lake outburst floods. Okay, so what are actually the causes of it and what are the mitigation efforts or the disaster risk framework that has actually been devised with respect to that of these particular glacial lakes. And we'll also look into what has been India's vulnerability to such instances and the recent examples. Okay. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about GLOFs, that is the glacial lake outburst floods, as well as it is a part of disaster management. And this particular topic can be mapped to GS paper 3 for the mains examination under disaster management as well as environmental pollution and degradation. Now moving forward, there has been a previous year question asked in the year 2017 with respect to that of climate change. So the entire topic, that is this particular umbrella term of climate change, becomes very, very important, as a result of which other catastrophes that actually happen like the flash floods and then the GLOFs etc. become even more important for both your prelims as well as the mains examination. Now moving forward, let us understand what this particular article is discussing about. So recently, the Union government has actually approved a rupees 150 crore glacial lake outburst flood risk mitigation program that is to be implemented by the NDMA, that is the National Disaster Management Authority, in Himachal Pradesh, in Uttarakhand, Sikkim, as well as Arunachal Pradesh. Now moving forward, let us actually understand what is this particular concept of the glacial lake outburst floods, that is the GLOFs. So these are nothing but it is the sudden release of water from the glacial lakes which are typically dammed by, that is there is a lot of water, volume of water that is actually dammed by a glacier. So this is actually a glacier. So, or a moraine, which is nothing but it is a natural accumulation of debris, the sediments, rocks, etc., which is formed by a glacier. So, basically, when there is sudden release of water that is actually dammed by a glacier or the moraine, that is a natural accumulation of debris, then that is called as a sudden GLOF or the glacial lake outburst floods. So when these natural dams, that is this glacier, that actually fail or collapse, what happens? They can actually cause maximum or massive flooding downstream. This releases millions of cubic meters of water in a very short span of time. That is, it's catastrophic, okay, because of its large volume as well as intensity and sudden in nature. And in a very short time, this actually leads to a catastrophic damage. Examples of GLOFs in the recent years is in October 2023, a GLOF had actually occurred in Sikkim when the embankment of the South Lonak Lake was actually breached. Next one, Uttarakhand Kedarnath flash flood 2013 was also an example which was induced by a GLOF in the Chorabari Tal Glacial Lake. Now moving forward, let us actually look at this particular image in order to understand. So this is actually the glacier that actually dams this entire lake, and this is the lateral moraine, which is nothing but the accumulation of debris, rock as well as other sediments which has been brought up by the glacier, and this is nothing but it is a terminal moraine complex. Now moving forward, let us see what are the different causes of this particular GLOF. Okay, so first one, there are a number of geological causes. The first one is earthquakes. These earthquakes, that is when there is a movement of land, that can actually trigger the breach of the moraine dams that actually lead to sudden lake outbursts. Next, it can be a volcanic activity also, or it can be some other seismic related events that can destabilize the glacial structure. So next one is the physical cause. It can either be excessive precipitation, that is the rain, that leads to the increase or a sudden increase in the water volume in the glacial lakes beyond their capacity. Next one, there is a particular concept called cryoseism. This is nothing but it is not tectonic, okay. So it is a non-tectonic seismic event within the glacial cryosphere, that is the ice, which can destabilize the moraine dam. Moving forward, there is also morphological causes, that is there can be mass movements, sometimes like the landslides, etc., into the glacial lakes that suddenly causes a huge displacement of water. Next one, water seepage through the glacial structures. This actually weakens the moraine dam, leading to the collapse. And the final one is the anthropological causes. First one is actually the global warming as well as climate change, which accelerate the glacial melting, rising the risk of outbursts. And the last one is infrastructural development such as the roads and other dams, etc. All these alters the natural water flow and destabilizes the glacial as well as the moraine structures. Now moving forward, let us see in what way or to what extent India is actually vulnerable to this particular catastrophe of GLOF. First one, the Glacial Lake Atlas. So, ISRO's National Remote Sensing Center, that is the NRSC, had identified over 28,000 glacial lakes in the Himalayan river basins using the ResourceSat-2 satellite images from 2016 to 17. And the high-risk regions include the catchments in the north and the northeast India have a larger number of glacial lakes, making these regions particularly vulnerable. And next one is High Mountain Asia vulnerability, that is the HMA vulnerability. So, over 9 million people in this particular region, including parts of India, are vulnerable to GLOFs as per a Nature Communication study. And also, if you see in case of Uttarakhand, the Geological Survey of India, that is the GSI, had actually identified 13 of the 486 glacial lakes in Uttarakhand as vulnerable to GLOFs. And finally, if you come to Jammu and Kashmir region, a 2021 study led by the Delhi University reported that this particular Jammu and Kashmir has the highest number of vulnerable glacial lakes, followed by Arunachal Pradesh and Sikkim. Now moving forward, what have been the framework of the National Disaster Management Authority with respect to that of risk management for the glacial lakes? First one, if you actually notice, it is important that this particular $sign, it is actually the structural measures, that is you need to build a geological structure for diverting water, etc. That is actually the structural measure. Next one, this particular hash sign, this actually represents non-structural or the organizational measures, like for example, create economic diversity, build up institutional mechanisms, etc. So here if you see, the actions which can be short term in the reduction of hazards actually include lowering of lake level by siphoning or pumping. So this actually comes under structural measures. And then if you see, reduction of exposure in the short term actions can be evacuation based on the early warning as well as monitoring, and this is actually the organizational measure. Next one, if you see long-term actions with respect to reduction of the hazard, what can be done? Artificial drainage channel, that is lowering of the lake level, which is again structural. Next one is reinforcement or increase of the dam. Next one is enhancement of river cross-section or protection from erosion. Now moving forward to reduction of exposure, how do you reduce it? Spatial planning according to the hazard maps, which is actually non-structural, it's something like institutional. Next one, protective structures, example, retention or deflection dams. Now moving forward, reduction of vulnerability. So how do you do that? As of now, there is actually, no or less number of short-term actions, but if you see over the long term, there can be, information, that is capacity and data can actually be provided. Then institutional setup has to be enhanced, and there has to be economic diversity, and finally there has to be disaster relief. The next topic that we'll be discussing today will be for dignity in the end. So this particular article discusses about this particular concept of euthanasia. What are the types? What are the arguments for it, against it? What has been the Supreme Court judgment with respect to euthanasia and end of life care system? All these things will actually be discussed over here, okay? So in this particular article, as I said, we'll be discussing euthanasia or the concept of mercy killing. What are the different types like active euthanasia, passive euthanasia, etc. And how can it be correlated with this particular Article 21 of the Constitution, which actually gives a right to life. And this particular topic can be mapped to GS paper 2 of the mains examination under fundamental rights as well as vulnerable sections of the society. Now moving forward, there has been a question asked in the previous year mains examination in the year 2015 with respect to that of Article 21 of the Constitution. So these kind of provisions, especially with respect to that of fundamental rights, become very, very important for both your prelims as well as the mains examination. Now moving forward, let us actually understand what this particular article is discussing about, okay? So, there has been a recent Supreme Court ruling or the judgment that actually reveals or highlights the legal as well as ethical confusion that is actually around this particular phenomenon of euthanasia or mercy killing in India. So, moving forward, it is important for us to understand first of all what has been the Supreme Court judgment, and moving forward, let us understand what is this concept of euthanasia and how it is actually taken forward by other countries legally. So, the recent case is that the case involved Harish Rana. He was actually a 32-year-old who has been in a vegetative state for the past 11 years with no chance of survival or recovery. So, his parents had actually sought the permission in order to remove the Ryle's tube. This Ryle's tube is nothing but it is a device which is used for feeding him through the nose to the stomach in order to allow him to die naturally. And what has and how has the Supreme Court actually reverted back, or it has actually reacted to this, is that on August 20, 2024, a bench which was headed by Justice D.Y. Chandrachud, that is the Chief Justice of India, they actually denied the request of these parents, ruling that the Ryle's tube is actually not a life support system and therefore cannot be removed, okay? So here, the judgment highlights that the withdrawal of the life support in terminal cases is allowed as per the Supreme Court's judgment which actually came out in 2018. So basically what happened was, in 2018, the Supreme Court actually came up with a landmark judgment saying that you can actually remove a life support system in terminal cases, okay? But recently, the Supreme Court has actually said that this particular Ryle's tube, which was used to feed a vegetative person, was actually not a part of or did not fall under the category of a life support system. So, the Supreme Court judgment in 2018 actually said that withdrawal of life support system in terminal cases is allowed on passive euthanasia case, and hence the Ryle's tube does not fall under this particular category. Now moving forward, it is important for us to understand what is this concept of euthanasia first. So euthanasia, often called as mercy killing, refers to the practice of intentionally ending a person's life in order to relieve them from incurable disease or unbearable suffering in a manner that is painless and dignified, okay? So this is a voluntary thing, it is not involuntary, okay? So there are two different types of euthanasia. One is active, which actually involves the direct action by a physician or a doctor, typically the administration of lethal substances in order to end a person's life of a terminally ill or an incurably ill patient. Next type is actually passive euthanasia. This involves withholding or withdrawing medical treatments necessary to actually keep the patient alive. Moving forward, let us actually see how has been this particular practice of euthanasia, prevalent in India over the years. So, active euthanasia, if you see, where a physician actually gives you directly or there is direct administration of lethal drugs in order to end a patient's life, this is actually prohibited under sections 302 and 304 of the Indian Penal Code, that is the IPC, now the BNS. And passive euthanasia, if you see, it is permissible under specific conditions like terminal illness, vegetative state, etc., officially recognized in India in 2011. Now, if you see this particular infographic, it actually talks about a chronology of different kinds of judgments that have been given by the Supreme Court with respect to euthanasia. Okay, so in 1996, if you see, in Gayan Kaur versus the state of Punjab 1996, the Supreme Court actually held that the right to life under Article 21, that does not necessarily include the right to die. So this is very, very important. And after almost, a decade or so, in 2011, in Aruna Shamba versus Union of India case 2011, the Supreme Court had actually held that passive euthanasia can be allowed under exceptional circumstances. Very, very important judgment. And after 5 years, that is in 2016, the Medical Treatment of Terminally Ill Patients, Protection of Patients and Medical Practitioners Bill, that is 2016, it was introduced that actually gives you the provision for the patients of sound mind to make an informed decision regarding the withholding of medical treatment for themselves. Thereby, this actually paves the way for implementation of passive euthanasia. So this actually, talks about what are the different conditions under which passive euthanasia can be administered. Next, in 2018, in Common Cause versus Union of India in 2018, the Supreme Court held that a person in persistent vegetative state can opt for passive euthanasia, and that a person can also execute a living will that they can actually write down earlier to refuse medical treatment in case of terminal illness. Now moving forward, let us actually see what was the 2018 Supreme Court ruling. That was a recent one. So, the 2018 Supreme Court judgment, Common Cause versus Union of India, had actually introduced stringent requirements for implementing passive euthanasia that include, number one, the creation of a living will in the presence of two witnesses should actually be there. Who are those two witnesses? One is actually a judicial magistrate, and next one is approval from two medical boards, and the jurisdictional collector is actually there. Next, what do you mean by this living will? It is nothing but it allows a particular patient in order to give advance consent for withdrawing life support if they fall into a permanent vegetative state with no prospect for further recovery or survival. So till now, we've actually seen what is euthanasia, what are the different types of euthanasia, active and passive, and what are the legal protections, whether it is prohibited or allowed under sections of the IPC, and in what all circumstances passive euthanasia can actually be administered. We looked at the chronology of the judgments that has been given by the Supreme Court, and also now we look into what are the different challenges associated with the 2018 judgment. Okay, so it was believed to be very complex as well as cumbersome. So since its enactment, no family of a terminally ill patient had managed to navigate the bureaucracy in order to benefit from passive euthanasia. And also, there is actually time-sensitive decision making is not accommodated here by the procedural requirements often needed urgently in the ICU settings. Followed by that, there have been financial exploitation by the hospitals also. So there are reports of hospitals continuing life support for the terminally ill patients unnecessarily for the purpose of their own financial gains. Now moving forward, the Supreme Court had actually come out with a list of guidelines in the year 2023 in case of passive euthanasia. So in January 2023, the Supreme Court of India had simplified the regulations concerning this process of passive euthanasia for terminally ill patients, aiming to make it more accessible and less burdensome for the families and patients or in times of critical conditions. So what have been the changes brought over here? This is actually seen in this particular image. Earlier, the living will, it was necessary that a judicial magistrate actually has to attest or countersign a living will. But now, an attestation by a notary or a gazetted officer is sufficient for a living will. Next, with respect to access to the living will, earlier, the living will was kept in the custody of the district court concerned, but now a living will be a part of national health record which can be assessed by the Indian hospitals. Next, in terms of primary board to examine, so which board should actually be, constituted to examine the condition of the patient. Earlier, the primary board of doctors need at least 4 experts from general medicine, from cardiology, from neurology, from nephrology, psychiatry or oncology with overall standing of at least 20 years. But now, 3 doctors, including treating physician and 2 other doctors with 5 years of experience in specialty, will comprise the primary board of doctors. Now, what was the earlier time taken to decide was that the 2018 judgment unfortunately could not give a particular time, did not specify any outer limit on withdrawal of the treatment. However, the recent changing or the 2023 guidelines that was brought by the Supreme Court, it says primary or secondary board actually to decide within 48 hours on the withdrawal of further treatment. And finally, with respect to that of the secondary board, earlier the district collector had to constitute the second board of medical experts, and now it is the hospital must immediately constitute a secondary board of medical experts. Now moving forward, the final part that we need to analyze is look at the concerns that are actually surrounding the recent Supreme Court judgment. Okay. First one, there are medical as well as the ethical confusion. Here, the judgment raises the concerns about what constitutes life support, because recently Supreme Court has actually rejected that this Ryle's tube that was used to feed the patient who was in a vegetative state, that does not fall under this category. So, there is no clear demarcation of what constitutes a life support, challenging the ethical principles like the beneficence, the non-malefice, the justice as well as autonomy. And also the refusal to remove the Ryle's tube questions the balance between sustaining life as well as prolonged suffering. Very, very important. Next one, there is an impact on patient as well as caregivers. So criticism focuses on the potential unnecessary prolongation of suffering of a particular person who is already in an incurable state, okay, who's suffering for both the patient and it is also a suffering for his caregivers, reflecting the societal fears and misunderstandings about passive euthanasia and its existence or persistence in India. The next one, there is a need for legal clarity. So the case actually highlights a necessity for clearer legal guidelines which should be there in order to distinguish between the euthanasia and the withdrawal of the non-beneficial life-sustaining treatments, and this actually suggests a greater role for medical and the ethical experts in such decisions in order to protect the patient's rights to have a dignified life as well as death. The next article that we'll be discussing about is Europe's push, India's agency, why Modi visit to Kyiv is significant. So this particular article, as the title suggests, actually discusses about what will be the significance of Modi's visit, that is the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine. And in this particular article, we'll be discussing about strategic diversification of India's foreign policy, where India is actually seemingly enhancing the cooperation it actually has with the East European countries. So, this particular topic becomes important for both the prelims as well as the mains examination under GS Paper 2, Effect of Policies and Politics of Developed and Developing Countries in India's Interest. So, moving forward, there has also been a previous year question which was asked in the year 2015 with respect to that of which of the following countries of the Southwest Asia does not open out to the Mediterranean Sea. So, map questions, especially with respect to these international relation news and topics, become very, very important for your prelims examination. Now, moving forward, let us understand what this particular article is discussing about. So, the Indian Prime Minister's upcoming visit to Kyiv marks a pivotal moment in India's foreign policy, and this actually highlights a significant shift towards greater engagement of India with respect to that of Central and Eastern Europe. And this visit, the first by an Indian Prime Minister to Ukraine since the establishment of the diplomatic ties back in 1992, actually comes at a time when the geopolitical landscape in Europe is undergoing significant changes, and it actually happens to be a lot more volatile due to the Russia-Ukraine conflict. Now, in this backdrop, if you see, the Indian Prime Minister's visit actually signals India's intent to recalibrate its foreign policy in order to address the emerging global challenges as well as the opportunities. Now, moving forward, it is important for us to understand what is the strategic importance of the Ukrainian visit. Okay, so the Indian Prime Minister's visit to Ukraine is a departure from India's traditional alignment with that of Russia, reflecting a nuanced approach to international relations. And this particular visit actually underscores the fact that India's recognition of Ukraine's strategic importance, particularly in the context of the post-war reconstruction, the defense cooperation, the agriculture trade, where India can play a significant role. And also, engaging with Ukraine aligns with India's broader strategy of expanding its influence in the Central as well as in the Eastern Europe, an area that has been relatively neglected by India's foreign policy so far. And also, the visit is a part of India's broader Europe push, which is actually aimed at foreign deeper ties. That is, they are actually trying to forge deeper ties with the region, which is becoming increasingly important in global geopolitics. So, if you actually see, this actually happens to be the map of Ukraine, where the borders towards the north, south, east and west becomes very, very important, whether it actually borders the Black Sea or not, or the Russian Federation, all this becomes important. And also, if you look at the Ukraine's geography, it is actually a country which is situated in Eastern Europe with the capital that is actually Kyiv, located along the Dnieper River in the north-central Ukraine. Also, if you see the bordering territories, it is bordered by Belarus to the north, Russia to the east, the Sea of Azov and the Black Sea to the south, as well as Moldova and Romania to the southwest. And to the west, if you see, Ukraine shares borders with Hungary, Slovakia, as well as Poland. In the far southeast, Ukraine is separated from Russia by the Kerch Strait, very, very important, which links the Sea of Azov to the Black Sea. So this is actually the map where we can actually locate Crimea here, the Sea of Azov, the Dnieper River, which actually flows into it, the capital Kyiv, and towards the northern side, it has the Belarus, and here Russia towards the east, and so on. Now, moving forward, here we need to know what is the implication on India-Russia relations, that is the implication of the visit. So, while Modi's visit to Ukraine signals a shift in India's foreign policy, it is unlikely to harm. So, while he is actually visiting, recognizing the strategic, presence of Ukraine, on the other hand, it looks like it will, not affect the India-Russia relations. And also, India has maintained a long, strong partnership with that of Russia, which had historical ties and also shared strategic interests. Also, this engagement, it presents the strategic diversification and it is not a realignment. Very, very important, allowing India to balance its relationship with both Ukraine as well as Russia. And the visit is part of India's broader strategy to engage with multiple global powers while preserving its strategic autonomy and existing alliances. The next article that we'll be discussing about is IIA finds a novel way to explore the sun's secrets by studying the solar magnetic fields. So in this particular article, we'll be discussing about few of the scientific, phenomena like the layers of sun's atmosphere, what are the different layers. And also, we'll be discussing about concepts of the coronal heating problem, what it is, as well as the concept of solar wind, geomagnetic storms, etc. And this particular topic becomes very important for both your prelims under the general science as well as for the mains examination under GS paper 3, science and technology developments and their applications and effects in everyday life. Now, moving forward, there has been a previous year question asked in the year 2013 in the prelims examination with respect to that of optical illusion. So, such scientific concepts are very, very important for both your prelims as well as your mains examination, specifically for your prelims. So, now let us understand what this particular article is discussing about. So, basically, the Indian Institute of Astrophysics has developed a new method. What is this method for? This is used for studying the sun's magnetic fields in various atmospheric layers. So, what is actually the impact of the sun's magnetic field in various atmospheric layers? And this actually uses data that has been provided by the Kodaikanal Tower Tunnel Telescope and offers fresh insights. Okay, so this data is actually giving us insights about different solar phenomena, which actually includes the coronal heating problem as well as the solar winds, etc. Okay, so here you need to understand these phenomena. Now moving forward, it is important for us to understand what is the layer or the layers of the sun's atmosphere. So the sun's atmosphere has different layers just like the Earth's atmosphere, and each layer is important for different purposes. The first layer happens to be the photosphere. Okay, so the photosphere is the sun's visible surface where most of its light as well as the energy are emitted. Okay, so this is the place where most of its light and the energy are emitted, and it is the layer we see when we look at the sun. So when we look at the sun, whatever is visible to us is the photosphere. Next comes the chromosphere. This is actually a thin layer of the sun's atmosphere which is located above the photosphere, where the temperature begins to rise and the solar material starts to glow in different colors visible during the solar eclipses as a reddish rim around the sun. So this is actually the chromosphere. Then comes the corona. Okay, the corona is the sun's outermost layer, which is actually characterized by extreme temperatures. Okay, it has very high temperatures and extends very far into the space, and this portion is visible during a total solar eclipse as a glowing halo around the sun. So if you see this particular image, you can actually see this as the core, and this is the radiative zone, and this is the convection zone, and this is called as the coronal hole over here. And this is the corona layer, okay, which is actually the outermost where the temperature is huge, and this is the chromosphere. Here you have the solar flares, and these are the sunspots that are there, and this is the photosphere, and these are the subsurface flows, okay. Now moving forward, let us actually understand what is this solar phenomena of coronal heating problem. So, the corona, you actually saw which layer it is, right? So, the coronal heating problem refers to the mystery in solar physics regarding why the sun's outermost layer, that is the corona, usually they say that the innermost layer is where, due to accumulated pressure, the temperature is also high. But here, it is actually a mystery where the sun's outermost layer, the corona, why is that significantly hotter than its inner layers, including the surface, that is the photosphere, okay? And the temperature in the corona can reach sometimes even up to millions of degrees Celsius, while the surface of the sun is much cooler, around 5,500 degrees Celsius only. And this is counterintuitive because generally we expect the temperatures to decrease, of course, when we move away from the heat source. And scientists actually believe that the sun's magnetic fields play a crucial role in this particular coronal heating problem, possibly by transferring energy from the interior of the sun to the corona in a way that it heats it to such high temperatures. And however, the exact mechanism behind this energy transfer is still not fully understood, okay? So this is the coronal heating problem where still the mystery actually remains around why and how is the outermost surface, that is the corona, remains hotter when compared to that of the other layers, okay? Now, similarly, let us understand what you mean by solar wind. Solar wind is nothing but it is a continuous flow of charged particles, okay, that actually has electrons as well as protons that stream out from the sun's outer atmosphere known as the corona, as we saw, and they actually travel throughout the expanse of the solar system. And these particles are propelled by the sun's intense heat and magnetic activity, and they actually reach speeds of around 400 to 800 kilometers per second. So imagine the intensity of it. And as the solar wind actually travels outward, it carries the sun's magnetic field with it, okay? So solar wind is actually traveling, and when it's traveling, it actually carries the sun's magnetic field with it, creating a vast region of influence called as the heliosphere, and this can actually go even beyond the orbit of the Pluto. So, when there is an interaction of the solar wind with the planetary magnetic field, including the Earth. So, the Earth actually has a magnetic field, and when this solar wind, which is characterized by highly charged particles like protons and electrons, they actually interact with each other, then there is a slight, disturbance in the magnetic field of the Earth that actually results in the formation of geomagnetic storms, which can even disrupt the communication and the navigation systems of the Earth, and also sometimes can produce beautiful auroras near the poles that you see. Now, what has been the new method that has been developed by the scientists, okay? So, a new method has been developed by the IAA, which actually involves using the data from multiple spectral lines in order to study the sun's magnetic fields across different layers of its atmosphere. And also, by using the Kodaikanal Tower Tunnel Telescope, this approach actually provides a more detailed understanding of the magnetic field changes from the photosphere to the corona, offering deeper insights into the solar phenomena, like why is there an occurrence of sunspots, why is there a change in the space weather patterns, etc. So this method actually helps us to better analyze and predict the space weather conditions. The next article that we'll be discussing about is a look at ongoing India's space missions. So as the title suggests, over here we'll be looking into what have been the recent developments with respect to that of India's space programs, especially with respect to different kind of missions, the roadmap, as well as the Gaganyaan project, as well as NGLV, and finally the private investments or the role of the private involvement or the private sector involvement in space activities. So in this particular article, we will be looking into what are the different space missions and what have been the recent developments and what is ISRO's way ahead in with respect to that of the space programs. And also we'll be looking into other projects like Aditya L1, the Gaganyaan project, INSAT, etc. And this particular topic becomes relevant for both the prelims and the mains examination with respect to GS paper 3, that is awareness in the field of space. Moving forward, there has been a previous year question asked in the 2016 prelims examination with respect to that of Mangalyaan, which was launched by ISRO. So these kind of launches, as well as what has been India's development with respect to science and technology and space missions, become very, very important for both your prelims as well as mains examination. Now moving forward, let us quickly run through what this particular article is talking about. So August 23 has actually been declared as India's National Space Day by the Indian Prime Minister, marking the successful landing of Chandrayaan-3's Vikram lander on the moon. So here, it is important for us to quickly run through what are the specifics of this particular Chandrayaan-3. It was actually launched on 14th of July 2023 and it successfully landed on the moon on August 23rd, 2023. And this landing was actually very, very significant as it was the first successful soft landing by India on the moon, following the previous attempt made by Chandrayaan-2 in 2019, which was unfortunately a failure due to a last-minute glitch. And if you see what has been the primary objective of this particular mission, that is Chandrayaan-3, was to achieve a soft landing on the lunar surface and to deploy a rover in order to explore and conduct scientific experiments on the moon surface, particularly focusing on the lunar south pole. And what are the mission components? It actually had the lander, which was named the Vikram, which was designed in order to make a soft landing on the moon surface and to deploy the rover. And then you had the rover named the Pragyan, which was equipped with scientific instruments in order to analyze the lunar soil as well as various characteristics of the lunar surface. Next, if you see various highlights of the Indian Space Research Organization in the last year, the first one is actually the Aditya L1 mission, which was launched on September 2nd, 2023. It is India's solar science mission, which began orbiting the L1 point on January 6, 2024, and it actually studied a solar storm as well. Next, moving on is the Gaganyaan mission. This is the first abort mission, that is the TVD1 of the Gaganyaan human spaceflight program, was successfully conducted on 21st of October 2023, demonstrating the crew escape system. Next was the XPOSAT. This was actually launched on 1st January 2024. It is nothing but an X-ray polarimeter satellite designed to study the polarized radiation sources in space. Next one is INSAT 3Ds, and this is actually a meteorological satellite, was actually launched on 17th February 2024, providing the GSLV's reliability ahead of the NASA ISRO, that is the NISAR mission. Now moving forward is the RLV TD test. This is nothing but ISRO conducted 2 landing experiments for its reusable launch vehicle Pushpak in March as well as June 2024. And finally, the SSLV, that is nothing but the small satellite launch vehicle. Here, the third development flight of the SSLV was successfully launched on 16th August 2024 recently, marking the completion of its development. Now moving forward, if you see what has been the roadmap of ISRO in the future, ISRO's chairman had actually announced a 25-year roadmap for the Gaganyaan program as well as the lunar exploration, including the Indian lunar landing by 2040 and a space station probably by 2035. And also with respect to that of the Gaganyaan training, 4 astronaut candidates have been named, with 2 undergoing advanced training in the US, and one of them is expected to fly to the ISS in the year 2025. Also, if you see the status of the NGLV, that is nothing but the next generation launch vehicle, ISRO is actually developing a new but powerful launch vehicle to replace the GSLV with a project report submitted to the Indian government. And finally, the involvement or the investments of the private sector with respect to that of space activities. Here, private companies like Agnikul Cosmos as well as Skyroot Aerospace are making significant progress, with Agnikul launching its first semi-cryogenic engine-powered vehicle in March 2024. Now let us solve few prelims as well as the mains practice questions. The first question actually reads, what does the coronal heating problem refer to? This actually refers to the challenge in understanding why the sun's outermost layer, that is the corona, is significantly hotter than its inner layer. So this is actually the right option. So the process by which sun surface temperature increases towards its core, this is actually wrong. The cooling of the sun's corona as it expands into space, this is also wrong. Solar wind particles are heated as they leave the sun, this is also wrong. So since B is actually the correct statement, the answer is option B. Now moving on to the second question, which of the following statements is or are correct regarding the geographical location of Ukraine? Ukraine shares its northern border with Poland. No, this is wrong. The Dnieper River flows through the capital city of Kyiv. Yes, this is correct. Ukraine is separated from Russia by the Bosphorus Strait in the southeast. This is also wrong. Since only the second statement is correct, the answer will be option B. Now moving on to the third question, consider the following statements regarding Chandrayaan-3 mission. It was successfully landed on the moon on August 23, 2023. Yes, this is correct. The primary objective was to deploy a rover to explore and conduct the scientific experiments on the lunar north pole. This is actually wrong. Vikram is the name of the lander used in Chandrayaan-3. This is actually correct since statements A and C, that is 1 and 3 are correct. The correct answer will be option B. Now moving on to the fourth question. Consider the following statements about recent achievements and future plans of ISRO. The first abort mission of the Gaganyaan human spaceflight program demonstrated the crew escape system successfully in 2023. Yes, this is correct. ExpoSat is an X-ray polarimeter satellite launched to study the moon surface in detail. No, this is actually wrong. ISRO has planned the establishment of an Indian space station by 2040 as part of 25-year roadmap. This is actually wrong. And the fourth statement reads, SSLV completed its development phase with a successful launch in 2024. This is actually right. Since 1 and 4 are correct, the correct answer will be option B. Now moving forward, the fifth question reads, consider the following statements. Both active and passive euthanasia are legally permissible in India. No, this is wrong. According to the recent Supreme Court guidelines, a district collector has to constitute the secondary board of the medical experts in order to proceed with the passive euthanasia. So, which of the above statements is or are correct? Since both are actually wrong, the answer will be option D. Now moving forward, let us actually solve the mains practice question, where the question reads, analyze the measures outlined by the NDMA for mitigating the risk associated with the GLOFs, that is the glacial lake outburst floods in India, and evaluate their effectiveness in safeguarding the vulnerable sections. So, the approach answer for this question has been broken down into three parts: the introduction, body, and the conclusion, where in the introduction we will briefly explain about the concept of GLOF and the vulnerability in India, and in the body we'll need to outline the NDMA measures, like we need to describe the initiatives such as monitoring high-risk lake and implementing the early warning systems. And finally, we need to talk about the effective analysis, like evaluate structural measures like, the artificial drainage, moraine, dam reinforcement, etc., as well as the non-structural measures like the evacuation protocols and hazardous mapping, and discuss the implementation challenges as well as the potential gaps. And therefore, at the final part, we need to conclude the answer by summarizing the importance of measures against the backdrop of climate change, and also we need to suggest the enhancements like the international collaboration for improved technology and expertise in management of the risks that have been posed by GLOF. So with this, we've actually come to the conclusion of our daily news analysis. For more such videos and live updates, please do like, share and subscribe to Narayana IAS Academy YouTube channel. Thank you.